Everyone feared the billionaire's fiancée until the new maid changed everything, Vanessa Kensington, 32 years old. Fiancée of billionaire Charles Whitmore was known as the Ice Devil. She had fired 14 maids in 2 years, one for folding towels the wrong way, one for walking 30 seconds too slowly, one for breathing too loudly. No one dared look her in the eye. But when Iris Monroe, 28 years old, the new black maid, began her first shift and looked directly at Vanessa's face, she saw what no one else had noticed. Vanessa's hands were trembling every time Charles entered the room, and her eyes, those eyes everyone called cold as ice, were actually pleading. "Please hate me," those eyes said. "Please leave, before it's too late." The Whitmore estate sat on 300 acres of Connecticut countryside, a monument to wealth so vast it seemed almost obscene. The main house had 47 rooms, each decorated with art worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. The gardens were maintained by a team of 12. The kitchen staff numbered 8. And the household maids, the ones who cleaned the rooms, changed the linens, and attended to the family's most intimate needs, numbered 6 at any given time. At least that was the official count. In reality, the turnover was so high that the actual number fluctuated constantly. Maids came and went with alarming frequency, driven out by the woman everyone called the Ice Devil. Vanessa Kensington had been Charles Whitmore's fiancée for 3 years. Before that, she had appeared seemingly out of nowhere, no family, no history, no past that anyone could trace. The tabloids speculated endlessly about her origins. Some said she was a Russian mail-order bride. Others claimed she was a former escort who had gotten lucky. A few whispered that she was a con artist who had manipulated her way into the billionaire's heart. What everyone agreed on was that she was cruel, not the casual cruelty of the wealthy who simply didn't notice the people who served them. Vanessa's cruelty was deliberate, calculated, almost artistic in its precision. She would watch a maid work for weeks learning her habits, her weaknesses, her fears. And then, at the moment when the maid felt most secure, Vanessa would strike. "You call this clean?" she would say, running a white-gloved finger along a surface that sparkled like glass. "I can see dust particles. Are you blind or simply incompetent? That's not how I like my tea. Did you forget, or do you simply not care? You're fired. Pack your things and be gone within the hour. I don't want to see your face again." The staff lived in constant fear of her. They whispered about her in the servants' quarters, traded horror stories like ghost tales around a campfire. One maid had been fired for sneezing during breakfast. Another for wearing perfume that Vanessa found offensive. Another for simply existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. And yet, despite all of this, Charles Whitmore adored her. He defended her to anyone who questioned his choice of partner. "Vanessa has high standards," he would say, his voice warm with affection. "She wants everything to be perfect. Is that so wrong?" It was into this house of fear that Iris Monroe walked on a gray November morning, carrying a single suitcase and a secret that would change everything. Iris had spent 2 years preparing for this moment. 2 years of learning how to be the perfect servant, how to clean without leaving a trace, how to move without making a sound, how to become invisible in a way that would keep her safe. 2 years of building a fake identity, a fake history, a fake life that would withstand any background check the Whitmores might conduct. She had done it all for one reason: destiny. Destiny Monroe had been Iris's favorite cousin, more like a sister, really, since they had grown up in the same house after Destiny's mother died. They had shared everything: clothes, secrets, dreams of a future that would be bigger and brighter than the poverty they had known. When Destiny got the job at the Whitmore estate 3 years ago, she had been overjoyed. "This is my chance," she had told Iris. "Good pay, room and board, and the owner is supposed to be this amazing philanthropist. Can you believe it? Me working for a billionaire." For the first few months, Destiny had called every week full of stories about the mansion, the gardens, the incredible food she got to eat. She had mentioned Vanessa a few times. The fiancé is kind of scary, but I try to stay out of her way. But nothing that suggested real danger. Then the calls became less frequent. Then they stopped altogether. When Iris finally tracked down Destiny's phone, she found it in a pawn shop in Hartford, sold by someone who matched no description of her cousin. When she went to the police, they told her that Destiny had quit her job and run off with a boyfriend, someone she had never mentioned, someone whose name and face remained conveniently unknown. The case was closed within a week. But Iris knew her cousin. Destiny didn't run. Destiny didn't disappear without a word. Destiny would never ever leave without saying goodbye. Something had happened to her, something terrible, and Iris was going to find out what. The first week at the Whitmore estate was an exercise in controlled terror. Iris learned quickly that the rumors about Vanessa were, if anything, understated. The woman was everywhere, watching everything, criticizing everyone. She would appear without warning, her heels clicking on the marble floors, her cold eyes scanning for any imperfection. The other maids scattered when they heard her coming, finding sudden urgent tasks in distant corners of the house. But Iris didn't scatter. She watched. She watched Vanessa's face when Charles entered a room, the way her smile froze, the way her shoulders tensed, the way her hands clenched into fists, hidden by the folds of her designer dress. She watched Vanessa's eyes dart to the corners of each room, as if looking for something or someone that might be listening. She watched the way Vanessa's cruelty seemed to spike whenever Charles was nearby, as if she were performing for an audience of one. And she watched the silver bells. Every maid at the Whitmore estate wore a small silver bell attached to their uniform. "So the family always knows where you are," the head housekeeper had explained during orientation. "Mr. Whitmore values efficiency. He doesn't like to be surprised." The bells jingled softly as the maids moved through the house, creating a constant musical backdrop to the daily routine. Most of the staff seemed to accept them without question, just another eccentricity of the wealthy. But Iris noticed that Vanessa flinched every time she heard them, as if the sound caused her physical pain. On her 8th day, Iris made her first real discovery. She was cleaning the library, a vast room lined with books that looked like they had never been read, when she noticed a small door hidden behind a heavy curtain. It was locked, but the lock was old, and Iris had learned a few things during her 2 years of preparation. Within 30 seconds, she was inside. The room beyond was small, barely larger than a closet, and it was filled with monitors. Dozens of them covering every wall, showing feeds from cameras hidden throughout the house. Bedrooms, bathrooms, the servants' quarters, the gardens. Even the rooms that should have been private Charles's office, Vanessa's dressing room, the guest suites were under constant surveillance. But it was the largest monitor that made Iris's blood run cold. It showed a room she had never seen before. A basement, perhaps, or a cellar somewhere deep underground, lit by harsh fluorescent lights. And in that room, sitting on a narrow bed, staring at the wall with empty eyes, was a young woman. It took Iris a moment to recognize her. 3 years had changed. Destiny had hollowed out her cheeks, dimmed her eyes, stolen the vitality that had once made her shine. But it was her. Unmistakably, undeniably her. Destiny was alive, and she was somewhere in this house. Iris barely made it back to her room before she broke down. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed, her hands pressed against her mouth to muffle her sobs, her whole body shaking with a mixture of relief and horror. Destiny was alive. But Destiny was also a prisoner trapped somewhere beneath the beautiful mansion, watched by cameras, held by a monster who smiled for the cameras and donated millions to charity. She had to get her out. But how the house was a fortress, staffed by people who were either complicit in Charles's crimes or too terrified to question them. The police had already dismissed her concerns once. And if she made a wrong move, if she revealed what she knew too soon, she might end up in that basement herself. She needed help. She needed an ally on the inside. And that was when she remembered Vanessa's eyes, the pleading, the warning, the desperate silent message that seemed to say, "Run before it's too late." What if Vanessa wasn't the villain everyone thought she was? What if she was a prisoner too, just one with a longer leash? The opportunity came 3 days later. Iris was cleaning Vanessa's private sitting room, a task usually reserved for more senior maids, when Vanessa walked in unexpectedly. Iris braced herself for the usual criticism, the cutting remarks, the threat of termination. But instead, Vanessa simply stood there watching her, her expression unreadable. "You're the new one," Vanessa said finally. "Iris." "Yes, ma'am." "You're different from the others." Vanessa walked closer, her eyes never leaving Iris's face. "You don't flinch when I enter a room. You don't scatter like the others. You watch." Iris felt her heart rate spike but kept her voice steady. "I just try to do my job, ma'am." "No, you're looking for something." Vanessa was close now, close enough to whisper. And when she spoke again, her voice was barely audible, so quiet that Iris had to strain to hear it. "The cameras can't pick up sounds below 30 decibels. Keep your voice down." Iris's breath caught. "Ma'am." "I know why you're here." Vanessa's eyes were intense, burning with something that looked almost like hope. "You're looking for someone. Someone who disappeared. How do you—" "Because I've been waiting for someone like you." Vanessa glanced at the corner of the room where a small red light indicated an active camera. She turned her body to block Iris from the camera's view. "I can't explain everything now, but you need to know I'm not your enemy. I never was." "Then why? Why do I fire everyone? Why do I make them hate me?" Vanessa's laugh was bitter, barely audible. "Because hatred makes people leave, and leaving keeps them alive." She gripped Iris's arm, her fingers digging in with desperate strength. "The ones who stay too long, the ones who get too comfortable, the ones who catch his attention, they disappear, just like your cousin." Iris felt the floor shift beneath her feet. "You know about destiny. I know about all of them." Vanessa's voice cracked. 7 women in the past 15 years. All young, all beautiful, all invisible enough that no one comes looking. He calls them his collection. She shuddered. "I was the first. I was 18 when he found me. Took me from an orphanage, promised me a better life. I spent 2 years in that basement before he decided I was ready to be his fiancée." The horror of it washed over Iris like a wave. "And you've been helping him." "I've been surviving." Vanessa's eyes were wet now, tears threatening to spill. "And I've been saving as many as I can. Every maid I fire is a maid who doesn't end up in that basement. Every woman I drive away with my cruelty is a woman who gets to go home to her family." Her grip tightened. "But I couldn't save them all. And the ones I couldn't save, they're still down there. Your cousin is still down there. Alive. Waiting. Then help me get her out." Iris matched Vanessa's whisper, her voice fierce. "Help me end this." "I can't." Vanessa's face crumpled. "He watches everything. He controls everything. If I make one wrong move, if he suspects for 1 second that I'm working against him, he'll kill them all. He's told me what he'll do, in detail. Then we do it carefully." Iris met her eyes, refusing to look away. "We plan. We prepare. We find the right moment, and when that moment comes, we take him down so hard he never gets back up." Vanessa stared at her for a long moment, and then, slowly, something shifted in her expression. The hopelessness began to give way to something else, something that looked almost like determination. "There's a charity gala in 6 weeks," she said. 300 guests. Press. Security focused on the party, not the house, and Charles will be distracted playing the part of the benevolent billionaire. She paused. "If we're going to do this, that's when. Then we have 6 weeks to plan." 6 weeks, Vanessa nodded slowly. "I've been trapped in this hell for 14 years. What's 6 more weeks? She released Iris's arm and stepped back, her face transforming instantly back into the cold mask of the Ice Devil. "Your work is adequate," she said, her voice loud enough for the cameras to pick up. "But I expect better tomorrow. Don't disappoint me." She swept out of the room without looking back, and Iris, standing alone in the silence, felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years, hope. The 6 weeks that followed were the longest of Iris's life. By day, she played the role of the obedient maid, cleaning rooms and dodging Vanessa's public criticism, while secretly mapping the house, identifying security weaknesses, and learning the routines of every staff member. By night, she and Vanessa met in carefully chosen locations, always different, always selected for their lack of camera coverage and planned. Vanessa's knowledge of the house was encyclopedic. She knew every hidden passage, every blind spot, every quirk of the security system. She knew Charles's habits, his weaknesses, his patterns. She knew which staff members were truly loyal to him and which were simply too frightened to resist. "The basement is accessed through his private study," Vanessa explained during one of their whispered meetings. "There's a panel behind the bookcase, cliché, I know, but effective. The lock is biometric. Only Charles can open it." "Then how do we get in?" "We don't. We get him to open it for us." Vanessa's smile was grim. "On the night of the gala, I'll tell him I have a gift for him, a new addition to his collection. He won't be able to resist coming down to see. And then you'll be waiting with the FBI." Iris had made contact with a federal agent named Rodriguez, a woman who specialized in human trafficking cases and had been trying to build a case against Charles Whitmore for years. The problem had always been evidence Charles was too careful, too protected, too good at covering his tracks. But with Vanessa's testimony and Iris's documentation, they finally had enough to move forward. The plan was risky. A dozen things could go wrong. But it was also their only chance. The night of the gala arrived. The Whitmore estate had been transformed into a wonderland of lights and flowers, every surface gleaming, every detail perfect. 300 of the nation's wealthiest and most influential people mingled in the grand ballroom, sipping champagne and congratulating each other on their generosity. Outside the press, waited behind velvet ropes, cameras ready to capture images of the beloved philanthropist and his beautiful fiancée. Iris moved through the crowd in her maid's uniform, invisible as always, her silver bell jingling softly with each step. She had positioned herself near the door to Charles's study, waiting for the signal. Her heart hammered against her ribs, each beat a countdown to the moment that would change everything. The ballroom was a symphony of excess. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto designer gowns and custom tuxedos. A string quartet played Mozart in the corner. Waiters in white gloves circulated with trays of champagne that cost more per bottle than Iris earned in a month. And everywhere, the laughter of people who had never known fear, never known hunger, never known what it was like to lose someone to the darkness beneath their feet. Iris hated them all, not because they were wealthy, but because they were blind. They stood in the house of a monster, toasted his generosity, praised his philanthropy, and never once wondered why the staff turnover was so high, why the maids wore bells like cattle, why the fiancé's smile never quite reached her eyes. Across the room, Vanessa was playing her part to perfection. She laughed at the right moments, charmed the right people, and clung to Charles's arm with what looked like genuine affection. Her ice blue gown caught the light with every movement, making her look like a winter queen, cold, beautiful, untouchable. No one would have guessed that beneath her designer gown, her heart was pounding with terror and anticipation. No one except Iris, who could see the slight tremor in Vanessa's hands, the way her eyes kept darting toward the study door, the almost imperceptible tension in her shoulders. 14 years of captivity had taught Vanessa to hide her fear well, but it had also taught Iris to recognize it. At exactly 9 p.m., Vanessa leaned in to whisper something in Charles's ear. Iris watched his face transform, the public mask of benevolence, slipping for just a moment, replaced by something hungry, predatory. His eyes lit up with a sick excitement that made Iris's stomach turn. He nodded eagerly, patted Vanessa's hand with possessive affection, and excused himself from the conversation he'd been having with the mayor. He walked toward his study with the casual confidence of a man who had never been caught, never been questioned, never faced consequences for his crimes. His footsteps were unhurried. His smile was serene. He looked like a man going to unwrap a Christmas present, not a monster descending to his dungeon of horrors. Vanessa caught Iris's eye across the room and gave an almost imperceptible nod. Her face remained frozen in its perfect smile, but her eyes, those eyes that everyone called cold as ice, burned with something fierce and desperate and alive. It was time. Iris followed at a distance, her movements careful, her breathing controlled. She watched Charles enter the study, watched the door close behind him. Through the crack beneath the door, she could see his shadow moving, hear the soft mechanical whir of the hidden panel sliding open. She counted to 60, giving him time to descend the stairs to enter the basement, to become trapped in the very prison he had built. Then she pulled out her phone and sent a single text to Agent Rodriguez now. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. The party continued behind her, oblivious. The string quartet played on. The champagne flowed, and Iris stood alone in the hallway, her heart in her throat, wondering if something had gone wrong, if the FBI hadn't received the signal, if she had just condemned herself and everyone in that basement to death. Then she heard it, the distant wail of sirens growing louder, the screech of tires on gravel, the sound of doors being kicked open, of voices shouting commands of chaos, erupting in the perfect stillness of the Whitmore estate. Within seconds, the mansion was swarming with FBI agents. They came through every entrance, badges raised, voices commanding, "FBI, everyone stay where you are. This is a federal operation." The guests scattered in panic, their champagne glasses shattering on the marble floors, their screams mixing with the sirens and the shouting. The staff froze in confusion, unsure whether to run or hide or simply stand still and hope to be overlooked. And in the grand ballroom, Vanessa Kensington, the ice devil, the cruel fiancée, the woman everyone had feared and hated for years, sank to her knees and began to sob. But Iris didn't see any of this. She was already moving, pushing through the chaos, fighting her way toward the study. Agent Rodriguez met her at the door, flanked by 4 agents in tactical gear. "The basement entrance is behind the bookcase," Iris said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "He's already down there. There are at least 7 women being held captive." Rodriguez nodded grimly. "We know. Thermal imaging confirmed multiple heat signatures below ground level." She gestured to her team. "Breach it." The agents moved with practiced efficiency. Within seconds, they had located the hidden panel and forced it open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The air that wafted up was cold and stale, carrying the unmistakable smell of fear and desperation, the smell of a place where hope had been locked away for far too long. Rodriguez went first, her weapon drawn, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. Iris followed close behind, ignoring the agent who tried to hold her back. She had come too far, waited too long, sacrificed too much to stay behind now. Destiny was down there, and Iris was going to bring her home. The staircase seemed to go on forever, spiraling down into the earth like a descent into hell. The walls were concrete, cold and damp, lined with pipes and electrical conduits that hummed with sinister energy. The only light came from the agents' flashlights, casting wild shadows that danced and twisted with every step. And then they reached the bottom. The basement was larger than Iris had expected, a network of rooms and corridors that spread out beneath the mansion like a maze. The main chamber was lit by harsh fluorescent lights that buzzed and flickered, casting everything in a sickly pale glow. Along the walls were doors, heavy steel doors with small windows and electronic locks, like cells in a prison. Number. Not like a prison. This was a prison. Charles Whitmore stood in the center of the room, frozen in the act of opening one of the cell doors. His face had gone pale, his confident smile replaced by an expression of shock and dawning terror. For perhaps the first time in his life, the billionaire philanthropist, the beloved public figure, the man who had always been above suspicion, looked afraid. Charles Whitmore. Rodriguez's voice was cold and hard, her weapon trained on his chest. You are under arrest for kidnapping, human trafficking, false imprisonment, and sexual assault. Get on your knees, hands behind your head. For a moment, Charles didn't move. His eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape, a weapon some way out of the trap that had finally closed around him. And then his gaze landed on Iris, on the maid. He had barely noticed the invisible woman who had been working in his house for 6 weeks, and understanding dawned in his eyes. You. His voice was a whisper, thick with disbelief. You're not just a maid. No. Iris stepped forward, her voice steady, her eyes locked on his. I'm the cousin of one of your victims. I'm the woman who spent 2 years learning how to get into your house. And I'm the person who is going to watch you spend the rest of your life in prison. Charles's face contorted with rage. You don't know what you've done. Do you have any idea who I am? I have lawyers. I have connections. You have nothing. Rodriguez cut him off. Get on your knees. Now. For a heartbeat, Iris thought he might resist. She saw his muscles tense, saw his eyes flicker toward the nearest cell door, saw him calculating odds that had already been decided. And then slowly, the fight went out of him. His shoulders slumped, his head dropped, and Charles Whitmore, billionaire philanthropist monster, sank to his knees on the cold concrete floor. The agents swarmed forward, cuffing his hands behind his back, reading him his rights in voices that held no sympathy, no mercy, no acknowledgement of the power he had once wielded. And Iris watched it all with a satisfaction so deep it bordered on pain. But she didn't linger. There were still doors to open, still women to save. She ran to the nearest cell and peered through the small window. Inside, a young woman sat on a narrow bed, her eyes wide with fear, her body pressed against the far wall as if trying to disappear into the concrete. She was thin, too thin, and her hair hung in matted tangles around her hollow face. But she was alive. After God knew how many years in this hell, she was still alive. It's okay, Iris said through the door, her voice breaking. We're here to help you. You're safe now. You're free. The woman didn't respond. She just stared, her eyes empty, her mind somewhere far away, where the words safe and free had lost all meaning. Iris moved to the next cell, and the next, and the next. Each door revealed another prisoner, another victim, another life that Charles Whitmore had stolen and locked away like a trophy. Some of them cried when they saw the agents. Some of them screamed. Some of them simply sat in silence, unable to comprehend that the nightmare was finally over. And then Iris reached the last cell. And there, sitting on a narrow bed, staring at the wall with eyes that had forgotten how to hope, was Destiny. 3 years. 3 years since the phone calls stopped. 3 years since the police told Iris that her cousin had simply run away. 3 years of searching, hoping, refusing to believe that Destiny was really gone. And now, finally here she was. Destiny. Iris's voice came out as a sob. Destiny, it's me. It's Iris. I'm here. I found you. Destiny didn't move, didn't blink, didn't show any sign that she had heard. An agent opened the cell door, and Iris rushed inside, falling to her knees beside the bed, reaching out to touch her cousin's face. Destiny's skin was cold, her cheeks gaunt, her eyes fixed on some distant point that only she could see. She looked like a ghost, like someone who had died years ago, but whose body had forgotten to stop breathing. Destiny, please, look at me, it's over. You're free. I'm taking you home. Slowly, painfully slowly, Destiny's eyes shifted. They moved from the wall to Iris's face, focusing with visible effort as if remembering how to see. and then like a dam breaking recognition flooded into her expression. Iris. Her voice was a rasp, barely audible, unused for too long. Is it really you? It's me. Iris was crying now, tears streaming down her face, her whole body shaking with the force of her emotions. I never stopped looking. I never gave up, and now I'm going to take you out of here. I'm going to take you home. Destiny stared at her for a long moment, and then she began to cry too, great heaving sobs that shook her frail body, that released 3 years of terror and despair and desperate abandoned hope. Iris held her, rocked her, whispered promises that everything would be okay, that she was safe, that she would never be alone again. Behind them, agents were leading the other women out of their cells, wrapping them in blankets, guiding them toward the stairs and the light above. 7 women in total, 7 lives, stolen 7 futures, destroyed 7 miracles of survival against impossible odds. And upstairs in the grand ballroom, where 300 guests had gathered to celebrate the generosity of Charles Whitmore, the truth was finally coming to light. The chaos in the ballroom had reached a fever pitch. Guests were screaming, pushing toward the exits, demanding answers that no one could give. The press, who had been waiting outside for glamorous photos, now captured footage of FBI agents leading household staff out in handcuffs. And in the center of it all, surrounded by agents, her ice blue gown stained with tears, stood Vanessa Kensington. But she was no longer the ice devil. She was no longer the cruel fiancée, the heartless mistress of the house, the woman everyone feared and hated. She was something else now, something raw and broken and desperately, achingly human. Please, she was saying to Agent Rodriguez, her voice cracking. Please tell me they're okay. The women in the basement. Tell me they're alive. Rodriguez studied her for a long moment, assessing, calculating. They're alive. All 7 of them. Thanks to you. Vanessa's legs gave out. She would have collapsed to the floor if an agent hadn't caught her. Thank God, she whispered. Thank God. I tried to save as many as I could. I tried to drive them away before he could take them. But the ones I couldn't save, I had to pretend I didn't know. I had to watch him destroy them. I had to, we know. Rodriguez's voice was gentler now. We've seen your file. We know what he did to you. And we know what you did to protect the others. 14 years. Vanessa was sobbing openly now, her perfect mask completely shattered. 14 years I've been his prisoner. 14 years I've worn his ring and smiled for his cameras and pretended to be a monster so that others could escape. Do you know how many women I drove away? How many lives I saved by making them hate me? 14. The voice came from behind them, and they both turned to see Iris emerging from the study, her arm around Destiny, her face streaked with tears. You saved 14 women. I counted. Every maid you fired, every woman you made cry they're all alive. They all went home to their families. Vanessa stared at her, at the cousin she had helped save, at the woman who had finally brought the whole nightmare crashing down. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm sorry I couldn't do more. I'm sorry I had to be so cruel. I'm sorry, don't. Iris released Destiny into the care of a waiting paramedic and crossed to where Vanessa knelt. She reached down and took the older woman's hands, pulling her to her feet. Don't apologize for surviving. Don't apologize for saving lives. You did what you had to do, and because of you, 14 women are alive today. 15, Rodriguez corrected quietly. You saved yourself too, Ms. Kensington. Don't forget that. Vanessa looked at them both, her eyes red and swollen. Her perfect makeup destroyed her carefully constructed armor, finally stripped away. And for the first time in 14 years, she smiled, not the cold smile of the ice devil, but the genuine trembling smile of a woman who had finally been set free. My name isn't Vanessa, she said softly. It's Maria. Maria Santos. I had almost forgotten. Outside, the sirens were still wailing, The cameras were still flashing. The world was still trying to make sense of the horror that had been hiding in plain sight. But inside the grand ballroom of the Whitmore estate, 3 women stood together, a survivor, a rescuer, and a prisoner finally freed, and began the long process of healing. Charles Whitmore was led out of the mansion in handcuffs at 10:47 p.m., his face captured by 100 cameras, his name already trending worldwide. The beloved philanthropist, the champion of women's causes, the kindest man in America, revealed as a monster who had imprisoned and tortured women for 15 years. The story would dominate the news for months. The trial would become the most watched in a decade. And the image of Charles Whitmore, his perfect facade finally shattered, would become a symbol of the evil that could hide behind wealth and power and public adoration. But that was all still to come. For now, in this moment, all that mattered was that the nightmare was over. The basement was empty, the prisoners were free, and the bells that had once tracked their movements like cattle would never ring in servitude again. Iris found Destiny in the back of an ambulance, wrapped in a shock blanket, a paramedic checking her vital signs. Her cousin looked up as she approached, and this time there was something alive in her eyes. Something that might, with time and love and care, grow back into hope. "You came for me," Destiny whispered. "I prayed every night. I told myself you would come, and you did. I'll always come for you." Iris climbed into the ambulance and took her cousin's hand. "Always. No matter how long it takes. No matter what I have to do. I'll never stop fighting for you." Destiny squeezed her hand back, a weak squeeze, but a squeeze nonetheless. And in that simple gesture, Iris felt 3 years of fear and grief and desperate searching finally begin to release. They had a long road ahead. Recovery wouldn't be easy. The trauma of 3 years in captivity would leave scars that might never fully heal. But they would face it together. They would rebuild their lives together. And they would make sure that Charles Whitmore and everyone like him never hurt another woman again. As the ambulance pulled away from the Whitmore estate, Iris looked back at the mansion, at the glittering lights, the manicured gardens, the monument to wealth that had hidden such monstrous evil. And she made a silent vow she would tear it all down. Not just the physical structure, but the system that had allowed it to exist. The silence that had protected the predator. The blindness that had let monsters wear masks of philanthropy. She would tell this story. She would make sure the world knew. And she would spend the rest of her life fighting for the women who couldn't fight for themselves. That was her promise to Destiny, to Maria, to all the women who had suffered in the darkness beneath the beautiful house. And it was a promise she intended to keep. The trial lasted 8 months. Charles Whitmore was convicted of kidnapping, human trafficking, sexual assault, and a dozen related charges. He was sentenced to 7 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. His fortune was seized and distributed among his victims. His name became synonymous with the worst kind of evil, the kind that hides behind a smile, that masquerades as virtue, that preys on the vulnerable while being celebrated by the powerful. Maria Santos testified at the trial, laying bare every detail of her 14 years of captivity. She spoke about the other women, the ones who hadn't survived, the ones who had been disposed of when Charles grew tired of them. She spoke about the staff members who had known or suspected the truth and looked the other way. She spoke about a system that protected the wealthy and powerful at the expense of the poor and invisible. And she spoke about the silver bells. "He made us wear them, so he always knew where we were," she said, holding up one of the small bells as evidence. "It was his way of reminding us that we were never free, never private, never truly ours. We were objects in his collection, always tracked, always watched, always controlled." She set the bell down on the witness stand. "But bells have another purpose," she continued. "They can be used to summon help, to sound an alarm, to let people know that something is wrong." Her voice strengthened. "That's what this bell does now. It calls for justice. It calls for change. It calls for a world where women are not collected like objects, where wealth does not buy impunity, where the invisible are seen and the voiceless are heard. The courtroom was silent, and then from the gallery someone began to clap. Then another person, then another, until the entire room was filled with applause, with tears, with the sound of 300 people bearing witness to a truth that had been hidden for far too long. 5 years later, Maria Santos stood at the podium of the United Nations addressing the General Assembly on the global crisis of human trafficking. She was no longer the Ice Devil. She was the founder of the Santos Foundation, an organization that had helped rescue over 3,000 trafficking victims worldwide. She was a best-selling author, a Nobel Prize nominee, a voice for the voiceless. She was living proof that survival was not the same as complicity, that victims could become advocates, that even the deepest darkness could give birth to light. "I spent 14 years wearing a mask," she said, her voice carrying across the vast chamber. "I played the villain because I had no other choice. I made people hate me so they would leave because leaving was the only way they could survive. I carried that mask for so long that I sometimes forgot it wasn't my real face." She paused, her eyes sweeping across the assembled delegates. But there was someone who saw through the mask. A young woman named Iris Monroe who came looking for her cousin and found instead a house of horrors. She looked at me, at the Ice Devil, at the woman everyone feared, and she saw the truth. She saw the pleading in my eyes, the trembling in my hands, the desperation beneath the cruelty. Her voice softened. She saved me by believing that I was worth saving. She saved all of us by refusing to accept the story that was being told and insisting on finding the truth. And that is what I ask of all of you today. Be like Iris. Look past the masks people wear. Question the stories that are being told, and never ever assume that the villain is simply a villain or that the victim has no power to become a hero. In the audience, Iris Monroe Santos, having married Maria's younger brother 2 years earlier, wiped tears from her eyes. Beside her sat Destiny, healthy and whole, working as a counselor at a trauma center in Brooklyn. The scars of her captivity would never fully heal, but she had found purpose in helping others who had survived similar horrors. And around both their necks, hanging from simple silver chains, were small silver bells, not symbols of captivity anymore, but symbols of freedom, of survival, of the moment when their lives had changed forever. After the speech, Maria found Iris in the crowd. They embraced without words, holding each other for a long moment, feeling the weight of everything they had been through and everything they had become. "Thank you," Maria whispered. "Thank you for seeing me." "Thank you for letting me," Iris whispered back. "Thank you for being brave enough to help even when it meant everyone would hate you." Maria pulled back her eyes, bright with tears. "Everyone called me the Ice Devil. They thought I was a monster. They didn't know that every cruel word was a prayer, every firing was a rescue, every moment of hatred was a gift of survival." She touched the bell around her neck. "They made me wear this to track me, to control me, to remind me that I was never free." She smiled, not the cold smile of the Ice Devil, but the warm, genuine smile of Maria Santos. "Now I wear it to remember, to honor the women I saved and mourn the ones I couldn't, and to remind myself that sometimes the cruelest kindness is the only kindness we can give." Iris nodded, her own bell catching the light. "The bells don't mean what they used to mean," she said. "No," Maria agreed. "Now they mean something else entirely." She looked out at the crowd, the diplomats, the activists, the journalists, the survivors, all gathered to bear witness to a truth that had been hidden for far too long. Now they mean we survived. We fought back, and we will never, ever be silent again.